Okay, hello everybody. Hello to those learning at home. I hope you're getting on okay. This week for your English home learning, you are going to start a 2-week project, which is a piece of writing on a story called Frances. So today I'm going to take you through the story. I'm going to get you started with some of the things you need to do before you can do an amazing piece of writing, and we'll look at it together. So let me just work out how to show you what I want to show you. There we go. All right, so here on your screen, you should be able to see the Frances Lesson 1 document, which is on the Year 6 page of the St Peter's Junior School website. So if you haven't got this open, you'll need to get this open on the website. And the first thing I've asked you to do is to read this story. This story is the inspiration for our writing, it's the stimulus. So we're going to read the story together now. You can follow along if you've got the document open, or if you just want to listen, that's fine. So this is called Frances. When I was a kid in the suburbs of Chicago, adventure meant Quetico Provincial Park up on the border of Minnesota and Canada. The name implies that the place was small, but Quetico is a 9 million acre preserve, so big you could go days and days without seeing another soul. We would go on camping trips up there, weeks of canoeing and portaging, seeing bears and moose and deer, sleeping under star-soaked skies. The park was isolated and so pristine that you could actually drink the water straight from the lakes. But I won't be going back to Quetico anytime soon, not after what happened to a girl named Frances Brandywine. Frances was 17 at the time, black-haired and with a reckless nature, determined always to leave the well-trod path, to break new ground and be alone. A few years ago, Frances was up in Quetico with her family. They were in a remote part of the park, camped on the shore of one of the deeper lakes, a lonely body of water carved millions of years ago by a passing glacier. The deep part of this particular lake was rumoured to be about 300 feet. One night, after her family went to bed, Frances took the rowboat out, planning to find a quiet spot in the middle of the lake, lay on the bench of the boat, look up at the sky, and maybe write in her journal. So she left the shore, rowed for about 20 minutes, and when she felt satisfied that she was over the lake's deepest spot, she lay down on the bench and looked up at the night sky. The stars were very bright, and the aurora borealis was shimmering like a neon lasso. She was feeling very peaceful. Then she heard something strange. It was like a knock. Clop, clop. She sat up, guessing that the boat had drifted to shore and run aground, but she looked around the boat and she was still a half-mile from shore. She leaned over the side to see if she'd hit anything, but she saw nothing. No log, no rocks. She lay back down. She told herself it could be any number of things, a fish, a turtle, a stick that had drifted under the boat. She relaxed again and soon fell into a contented reverie. She had just closed her eyes when she heard another knock. This time it was louder, a crisp plop, 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 like the sound of someone knocking hard on a wooden door, except this knocking was coming from the bottom of the boat. Now she was scared. She leaned over the side again. It had to be an animal, but what kind of animal would knock like that? 3 quick, loud knocks in rapid succession. Her mouth went dry. She held on to each side of the boat, and now she could only wait to see if it happened again. The silence stretched out. A few minutes passed, and just as she began to think she'd imagined it all, the knocks came again, but this time louder. Bam, bam, bam. She had to leave. She lunged for the oars. She got them in place and began rowing. The water was very calm, so she should have made quick progress. But after rowing feverishly, she looked around and she realised that she wasn't moving at all. Something was keeping her exactly where she was. Again, she tried rowing. She rowed and rowed on the verge of tears, but she went nowhere. She stopped. She was exhausted. Her heavy breathing filled the air. She cried. She sobbed. But soon she calmed herself again, and the boat was silent again for 10 minutes, then 20. Again, she tricked herself into thinking she'd imagined it all. But just like before, just when she was beginning to get a grip on herself, the knocking came again. This time as loud as a bass drum. Boom, boom, boom. The floorboards of the boat shook with each knock. Now she was so shaken, she started making questionable decisions. The first was to lower one of the oars into the black water, trying to feel if there was some landmass, even some creature she could touch. As soon as the oar broke the water's surface, though, she felt a strong, silent tug at the other end, and the oar was pulled under. She screamed, she jumped back, and now she had no options. All she could do was sit and hope and wait. Wait for the morning to come. Wait for whatever was going to happen. The knocking went on through the night. She passed the time writing in her notebook, and it's only because of this notebook that we know what happened that night. Frances can't tell us. She was never seen again. The boat was found on shore the next day, empty but for the journal. On those pages were her frantic jottings, all written in her distinctive handwriting, all but the last page. When the journal was found, that page was still wet, and on it were 4 words, looking as if they'd been written quickly with a muddy finger. They said, "I did knock first." I hope you enjoyed that story, that spooky story. So what you're going to do over the next 2 weeks that you're at home, you're going to imagine what Frances was writing in her journal while she was sat on the boat that night hearing the terrifying knocks. It must be the story of her experience, otherwise the people who found it wouldn't know what had happened to her and wouldn't know all the events that had happened during the night. So by the end of these lessons, by the end of the 2 weeks, you will have written her journal entry. You will need to write it in the same genre as the story so far, which is horror. It's a scary ghost story, so yours needs to be scary too. So before we start writing our journal, we've got some preparation to do, and that's what you're going to be doing for the first 3 lessons this week, is preparing so that you're ready to write your journal entry. So you will need to have the following pieces of knowledge so that you can do a really good piece of writing. First of all, you need to understand what the structure is. So what do you need to write and in what order? Second, you need to understand the purpose. Why are we writing it? Third, you need some new brilliant vocabulary to use. Fourth, you're going to need to know some background information. There's some things in this story that you might not be able to write about if you don't know about them. Things like rowing boats, things like the Quetico Provincial Park. If you've never been somewhere like that, you're not going to be able to write about it. So we're going to do some research and find out some background information. And finally, I'm going to give you a new sentence structure to use. And actually, this one isn't really new. It's one that we've used before, but it's a revision. It's one that is really good if you can use it properly. So we're going to go over that one again, and I would like to see that in your writing. So by the time we've gone through all of that, you'll be ready to start writing. And I've done a little example. I've written this example that I'm going to share with you now, so that you can see what the kind of thing is that you're aiming to produce by the end of the 2 weeks. So remember, you're pretending to be Frances, and you're pretending to write in her journal, and you're pretending that you're actually there on the boat as Frances was during that night. So I'm just going to read you the example that I've written. So mine says, "Dear Diary, my hands are trembling as I write what might be my last ever entry. What started out as a normal day has turned into my worst nightmare. I'm scared for my life. Quetico Provincial Park is the most picturesque place I have ever been to. The lake, glass-like and motionless, reaches far into the distance, mirroring the sunlit azure sky above. Towering majestically over the vast body of water stand row upon row of statuesque pine and spruce giants. We arrived yesterday, and I was desperate to breathe in the clean air, get our camping stuff set up, and take my little rowboat out onto the lake. I waited until night had blanketed the park in darkness before I cautiously climbed into my boat. Not used to being on water, it took me a few minutes to steady myself, and for a moment I was sure I would topple into the infinite black lake beneath me. But I didn't. Confidence restored, I grabbed the wooden oars and rowed out to the middle of the lake. It was easy going. The vast body of water was as still as a mill pond, and the boat glided through the water like a warm knife through butter. Soon I had reached the centre of the lake. Reclining against the bench, I sighed as a feeling of total tranquillity washed over me. As I gazed into the night sky, speckled with stars and streaked with the glowing lights of the aurora borealis, it occurred to me that I was the only one awake in the park. every other living being slept. It even seemed as though the trees slept, bowing and bobbing their heads in deep slumber. A knock. Then again, a definite knock on the side of my boat. Did I drift off into a half sleep? Could an animal have made that noise? I peered over the side of the boat, but the lake remained as it was. Still. Black. A mirror reflecting my own image back at me. Sinking back into the boat, I held my breath and listened intently for the slightest hint of noise. My eyes searched the blackness for movement. Nothing. Relieved, I released my breath and felt my shoulders relax. A knock, louder this time, and I knew I could not mistake it or explain it away. Heart pounding in my chest, I snatched the oars and frantically pulled at the water. Tears of fear cascaded down my cheeks, and whimpers of terror escaped from my mouth. I pulled as hard and as fast as I could on the oars as the realization that I am going nowhere dawned on me. I panicked. I cried out for help. My burning arms forced me to stop rowing. Desperate for any explanation, I pushed one oar into the water to see if my boat was banked, but it was snatched away and dragged under by some invisible force. I listened. Silence. The knocking had stopped and was replaced by the thudding of my heart in my ears. On the verge of having a panic attack, I lay back against the bench once more and focused on the luminescent lights as they danced in the obsidian sky. With nowhere to go and the long night stretching out in front of me, I picked up my journal and I began to write. The hours passed and the knocking came and went. I focused all my attention on the marks my pen made on the paper, not daring to look up. Disturbing thoughts passed through my head. Will I die here tonight? Will the knocking ever end? Will this journal be the only record of these events? I refused to acknowledge them or dwell on them. I did knock first. So you can see how my example sounds like I'm pretending to be Frances, and it gives a snapshot of what had happened to her right up until that moment when something happened, but we don't know what it was. And then we've just got the I did knock first. And you can see that I've chosen to make it look as if she was halfway through writing a word and something happened that made her pen just swipe across the page, and the reader's left guessing, what was it? What happened to her? And then you've got the forwards from the mystical whatever it is that left it in her notebook, I did knock first. So first of all, then we're going to look at the structure of this piece of writing, of this example that I've done for you. And once we understand the structure of this, you can then use the same structure for your piece of writing. So structure is simple. It's just what happens and in what order does it happen. So if you broke my diary entry up, this is the structure that it follows. So we've got the opening paragraph, which is this bit right at the top here where it says Dear Diary, that first paragraph there, which is where Frances just introduces the story. Next of all, we describe how Frances arrived at the park that morning, and I did a bit of a description of the park. Then the next event that happens is it gets to night and Frances decides to row out into the lake on her own. And this week, I put the dotted line there because this week, that's where you're going to stop. You're going to focus on this very beginning bit this week. And then next week, you're going to focus on this other bit at the other side of the dotted line. But the next bit that happens is she's on her boat and she hears the noise. Then she decides to try and leave because the noise has frightened her. She can't leave though, so she's stuck and the knocking noise returns. And then you've got the ending. I decided to end it with her asking questions and starting to worry and starting to panic, and then her pen being swiped across the page and the 4 words, I did knock first. So all of you need to finish your journal entry with I did knock first. That should be the end of everybody's. But what happens right before that moment is up to you. You can leave it on a cliffhanger like I had and just have her stopping mid-sentence or mid-word. Or you can think of something, maybe she noticed something new that happened, maybe something frightened her and startled her and she dropped her pen in a notebook, and then it was I did knock first. It's up to you. So like I just said, this week you're going to focus on the first 3 boxes, and then the other 4 boxes will be next week. So now that we know the structure, we know what we're writing and we know in what order we're writing it, we need to know the purpose. So why are we writing it? So for today, for this week, we're going to think of the purpose of the first 3 boxes, and then next week you'll think of the purpose of these 4 boxes. So every piece of writing has purposes. There's a reason behind the writing, there always is. So it might answer one or more of these questions. So it might tell us something, it might try to make us feel something, or it might be trying to achieve something. So if we look at the example I've just done for you and we think, what is this example trying to tell us? Well, first of all, it's a journal entry. So the fact that it is a diary or a journal entry means it's got its own purpose to begin with. So a journal or a diary is where you write your memories. It's a record of things that have happened so that you can come back and look at it in years to come and you can remember some of the things from that day. So usually it's not meant to be read by anybody else. It's only meant to be read by the person who's reading it. That means that it shouldn't sound like a story. It shouldn't sound like it's meant to be read by anybody else. It should sound like your voice when you're writing. It can be informal. It doesn't have to be formal like a letter because you're writing it for yourself. However, some people get confused when they're writing diary entries and they simply write a list of what they did. So it might sound something like, this morning I woke up, I got dressed, I went downstairs, I had my breakfast, then I went to school, and at school we did some writing, and at playtime I played with so-and-so, and it's just a list of things that happened in the day. When actually, if you looked back at that page in your diary in, say, 20 years' time, you look back at that page, it wouldn't really mean anything to you. It's just a list of things you did that day. You wouldn't be able to picture what happened or what it was like or what that day was like. So you do need description. A lot of children say to me, why am I describing it in detail when it's my memory and I know what it looks like? And I always say, because the point is you're supposed to be able to read this way into the future and still remember it. So you might not be able to remember all the details of how the place looked or the smells of the place or the sounds you could hear. So you still need to write a really vivid description so that you can picture that memory and be taken right back to that memory. And I've already said it should sound like Frances's voice. It should sound like she's talking to her diary, almost like a conversation, but obviously the diary isn't replying, but she's talking it, rather than an author telling a story. So it should sound slightly different. It can be informal. So informal means you can use words like stuff and okay. It doesn't have to be terribly formal. So that is what the writing's trying to tell us. It's trying to tell us about Frances's memory of the day. What is the writing trying to achieve, and what is it trying to make us feel? So this writing is trying to achieve and make us feel many things, and that changes as the story goes on. So what the writing is trying to make us feel in the first half is very different to what it's trying to make us feel in the second half. So for example, for the first half, you could say that the writing is trying to make the nature reserve seem peaceful. So when Frances arrives, she describes it in a way that makes it all seem really beautiful and peaceful, and Frances herself seems really calm and at ease as well, and she even says at one point that she feels really calm. So that's done deliberately. You might be thinking to yourself, if it's a ghost story, if this is supposed to be a scary story, why are they trying to make everything feel calm? Surely it'd be more effective to make the forest seem really ghostly and scary and describe the trees as being like ghosts with gnarly fingers sticking out. But actually, the reason that they've done that is on purpose, is to contrast with the scary events that are to come later. It's almost to lull the reader into a false sense of security so that when the scary stuff happens, they're not ready for it, they weren't expecting it, it's a surprise. So it's a good writing technique there to do, to use contrast. Okay, so we're thinking about the beginning part of the writing, and we're trying to make the nature reserve seem peaceful. We're trying to make Frances seem calm. So those are 2 purposes that I've given you there of the first half. I've said we're trying to make the nature reserve seem peaceful, and we're trying to make Frances seem calm. So those are 2 purposes I've given you. And you might be able to think of some more. You might be able to think of some more purposes. You could think of some more purposes for Frances. How else are we trying to make Frances seem? You might be able to think of another thing that we're trying to use. So you could say, trying to make the sky seem something, or we're trying to make the the lake seem calm? Because it did say it was very still, didn't it? So there's lots of different purposes. So now we know what the purposes are, we know what we're trying to do. When we write our first half, we've got to try and make that sense of calmness and peacefulness. Now we need to look at how the author achieves that purpose. So how do they make the nature reserve seem peaceful? How do they make Frances seem calm? Well, it's all in the words that they choose and the phrases that they choose. All the words and phrases have been picked on purpose to try and achieve this purpose, to try and make the nature reserve seem peaceful, to try and make Frances seem calm. So let's have a look at the first example. So let's say the purpose was to make the nature reserve seem peaceful. Now I had a look through the Frances story, the first story we read, and also my example of a diary entry, and I picked out lots of words and phrases that I think help to make the nature reserve seem peaceful. So the first three are quite similar: isolated, remote, lonely body of water. So those three words, isolated, remote and lonely, give the impression that the park is all on its own, all by itself. There's nothing else nearby. It's not a busy place. It's a quiet, isolated place. Isolated just means on its own, similar to remote and lonely. Body of water is a nice phrase to use instead of lake, so you don't keep saying lake. We need to think of some synonyms. So body of water is a good one. Star-soaked skies, which is also an example of alliteration. I think that makes the nature reserve seem peaceful. If you've got a nice starry sky, it's relaxing, it's calm. Pristine just means untouched, perfect. Then this idea of a passing glacier having caused the park, the idea that it's just passing, floating by, that gentle movement reinforces the feeling of calm and peacefulness. The aurora borealis, if you aren't sure what they are, that's the northern lights. You might have heard them be called the northern lights before, and you're going to look at them in a later lesson in more detail, so you'll really understand what they are. But they are basically lights in the night sky that kind of fade and glow and gently move across the sky. So that, again, reinforces this notion of peace and gentleness and calmness. And then this is just a nice simile that I liked, was shimmering like a neon sea. The black water, when I taught this in class, some of the children said to me that for them, black water didn't come across as peaceful and calm, that for them that was quite frightening if the water's black because you can't see what's in it. So you might think black water doesn't instill a feeling of peacefulness and calm, but to me, it does. I think of a really still lake that's black, so you can just see yourself when you look into it. And then this phrase, obviously, water was calm. Motionless, which means something's not moving, so it's still. Majestically, blanketed, that feeling of having a blanket over you is really calming. Still, and like a warm knife through butter. So all those words and phrases really help you to feel calm and peaceful. So what I would like you to do now is have a look at the Frances story and the example diary entry in your booklet. You should have both of them. In fact, I might have the booklet here for you to look at. Let's have a look. No, I don't. But anyway, you should have both of them in your booklet. And what I'd like you to do is have a go at what I've done here. So first of all, start off with the purpose of to make the nature reserve seem peaceful. And I'd like you to find these words and phrases and underline them in a colour. You could do blue because I've already put the writing in blue. And if you can find any others that you think, oh, that also makes the nature reserve seem peaceful, you can underline those in blue as well. Then after you've done that, I would like you to think about the other purpose that we've just identified, which is to make Frances seem calm. And I would like you to find the words that make Frances seem calm and underline them in a different colour. So use both my example diary entry and the original Frances story and look through and think what words really make Frances seem calm. It might be verbs, so it might be the way that she's moving that makes her seem calm. It might be adjectives, words used to describe her that make her seem calm. Have a look through and see what you can find. It doesn't have to be one word on its own. It can be a phrase like some of the things I found. And then if you've thought of any other purposes, if you can think of maybe a couple more purposes of this text, of this first half, remember we're only going up to the dotted line, then you can perhaps underline the vocabulary that achieves those purposes in a different colour again. thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that's helpful and that's kick-started you on the first lesson of your Frances journey. Tomorrow you'll be doing some more, ticking off some more of these things. Where's my little list of things that we need to know? It's up here somewhere. So today we've done the structure and the purpose, and we've had a little look at some vocabulary from the text. In tomorrow's lesson, you will be given some more brilliant vocabulary to use, and you're going to have a look at some background information. And then the third lesson is teaching you the new sentence structure. And then the fourth lesson is where you will write your version of the first 3 boxes. I can't wait to see what you write. Please do share with me what you do. You've all gone a bit quiet on me. Please do send me things. I'd love to read what you can do. The children who did it in school this week have come up with some lovely writing, and it's really effective. So I'll be excited to read what you've done too. Okay, bye everybody. Have a nice week at home.